Hello, I'm Sarah, and today I am taking on the Cheap Art Supply Challenge. Now you may remember a few weeks ago when I showed you how to get thousands of colors out of 12 pencils, and I used my Crayola pencils. Since then, I have decided that I would actually like to have a go and see just how good these pencils are, so I'm going to complete a whole page using only these 12 Crayola pencils. Let's see how I go. So I'm Sarah Renee Clark, and my goal is to help you get more creative every day. And I want to help you do that on a budget. So that's why I wanted to take on this challenge, and I wanted to actually see if we only have a set of Crayola pencils, especially a small set like this one that cost about $5 maximum, how good do they actually work? Now, I usually use Prismacolors, which are actually on the cheaper side of the professional level pencils, but there are a lot of other mid-range pencils, and in a future video, I will be going through a lot of them to show you exactly which pencils you can buy for adult coloring books. But today, we're going to put these Crayolas to the test, and we're going to see just how good they can be at blending, at doing gradients, at mixing colors, and we'll even see if the white pencil actually does anything. Wherever it is, here it is, the white pencil. Let's see what it can do. I always love to choose my colors first, and using a color palette helps me to think outside the box and find colors that work well together that I wouldn't normally think to try. I'm going for a palette from my Sky collection today, and this one has caught my attention. I love the ombre gradient of colors, and I think I can create something similar with my 12 pencils. To make things easier, I'm going to print this single page off so I can match my pencils as close as possible. Now, because I'm working with only 12 colors, I'll have to layer them to make all the colors I need for this. If you remember back to my previous video, we can make thousands of colors from just these 12, and you can download this swatch chart in the link above to try it for yourself. The color palette I've chosen has colors that are similar to my set of 12, so we won't have to layer them too much to get them a little bit closer to the actual colors we want. Now let's start on the background to make our sky. I'll speed up some of this footage as we go, so you're not going to have to watch me for hours, but I do promise to slow down for the important parts. My number one tip to get the most out of cheaper pencils is to use light pressure and work in layers. Because I'm not sure how well these pencils will blend, I'm doing my first layers extremely lightly. I wouldn't usually do them quite as lightly as this, but keeping light pressure is a great way to make sure you can blend each of your colors together. I want to keep them light so that I have greater control. And as I add more layers, it will be easier to change the color and easier to blend between the colors in the gradient as the purple turns into pink, the pink into the orange, and the orange into the yellow. If you're finding your layers are still too hard and you're struggling to press lightly, try moving your hand further toward the back of the pencil. Holding your pencil further back and on an angle, like you can see I'm doing, will make it much easier to use light pressure and keep your coloring even. Holding your pencil on an angle will also make your coloring smoother and reduce any obvious pencil lines. As I move between colors, I'm overlapping the layers and trying to make the pencil the lightest at the edge of each color. Instead of starting the next color where the last one ends, I'm actually layering it over the top. This is how you can create a smooth transition between each color. With high quality artist pencils, you'll be able to achieve these kinds of transitions and blends more easily, but it's not impossible with the cheap pencils. The key is to keep that pressure light and to work in layers. In this case, I've gone a little overboard with how light I'm pressing. It means this picture is taking far longer than I intended, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't press too hard and ruin my gradient. Every time I add a bit more pressure, I'm finding that my pencil lines are more visible, and that's just not what I'm going for. I really want to replicate the smooth finish that I love when I'm using my Prismacolor pencils. And let's not forget, these 12 colors aren't exactly the colors I want from the color palette. So layering is also allowing me to adjust each color to be closer to the colors I want. My yellow pencil isn't really cooperating today. It keeps breaking, which means the lead inside is probably broken from being dropped or damaged in the shop. And look, this is not uncommon with pencils, and it's not just the cheap pencils. Prismacolor pencils are notorious for breaking easily because they have such a soft core, which is also how they blend so beautifully. But the biggest difference I'm noticing with these cheap pencils is that even the ones that aren't broken inside are breaking as I sharpen them. The wooden casings are a lesser quality, which is not unexpected for the cheap price, but it does mean that they're harder to sharpen gently. And so they're getting caught in my sharpener, and this sharpener is fantastic with my other pencils. So it's not a huge downside, but it's definitely frustrating, especially because now I'm left with much shorter pencils and I've wasted so much lead just in the sharpening. Oh, hello Moscow, here for a quick visit. Moscow never wants to miss out on a chance to be creative with me, or maybe just to steal my attention away. I had really hoped that my colours would be more vibrant at this point. My layers are very, very light because I'm finding it hard to add more pressure without adding visible pencil lines. I feel like this is usually easier even with cheaper pencils, so I don't know, maybe I'm just being a little bit pickier than usual. I think it's also being tricky because I'm working on such a large area and I really want this to be a smooth gradient of colours. So usually at this point, I would start using a harder pressure to burnish in the colours. You see, paper has a texture, otherwise known as tooth, that allows you to put down multiple layers of your pencil. Now, some paper has a much larger tooth than others, like watercolour paper or thicker cardstock. Generally for pencils, I like to use a cardstock that's about twice the thickness of printer paper. It's just enough tooth or texture that I can put down multiple layers of pencil and create good blends. That's why light pencil work often shows the texture of the white paper underneath, because light pressure stops your pencils going into the deep valleys of the tooth, into those lowest points. But when you press harder with your pencil on the paper, you flatten the texture and you actually get the pigment into all those lowest parts of the paper. It creates a bolder colour and it removes that white, but it also makes it much harder to add more pencil layers on top and therefore impossible to create nice gradients and blends after you've done that. This is what we call burnishing. It's often the final step in a drawing where you press harder to remove any further white and make the colours bolder, but we do it last so that you can do all your blending and your gradients in the layers underneath. For some reason, I'm finding the layering harder today than usual. The tooth in my paper just doesn't feel right, and I can't tell if it's the pencils or the paper because it looks like it has tooth and it's the cardstock I usually use, but it just doesn't seem to be cooperating today. So I'm going to use a different method to remove the white and blend my pencils. Burnishing is usually my go-to method. I actually never use blending solution or other products to blend my pencils normally, but today we're going to try some nail polish remover to smooth out these lower layers before I add a final layer of pencils. This is my second big tip for working with cheap pencils, is to try out some different blending tricks. You can buy proper pencil blending solution, but since we're doing a cheap pencil challenge, it only feels right to use something that many of us would already have at home. There are other methods you can use to blend as well, but I've chosen nail polish remover because I found it to be more effective than other methods and it still allows you to do more pencil work on top when it has dried. Some oils and mineral spirits may produce brighter colours when you put them on top, but they don't allow you to add further details later. I'm using a cotton bud to carefully apply a small amount of the nail polish remover to my pencils and slowly use it like a paintbrush to blend my colours together. It's not really making a huge difference at this point, which again, kind of leaves me wondering if maybe I'm not using the paper that I think I am. But look, it's okay because I plan to put down more pencil when I'm done. This is just helping me to fill in those tiny white holes and to flatten my colors. Now that my blending has dried, it's time for a final layer of pencil. I'm going to press harder now and try to burnish my colors like we talked about. Hopefully I don't add pencil lines in the process. I've tried using my white pencil a few times in the hope that it will help to burnish and lighten my colors, but honestly, it's not doing anything. I've also tried adding a bit more variety in the background by adding different patches of colors like the clouds in the original color palette, but honestly, I'm kind of regretting it. Oh well, look, let's just roll with it and see how we go. This final layer of color is definitely helping the colors to finally pop, and I'm really happy with how close they are to the colors in the palette that I was going for. So I've paused the video for now because my recording stopped, and obviously you can see that I've done a lot more since a few seconds ago. And in any other case, I probably would have just kept going, but this is our biggest balloon and you can see that I've done quite a bit of lighting, so I didn't want you to miss out on the how-to for this. So I'm gonna slow down the video just for this section, and I've actually made a copy of this page. Well, sort of, it's actually a bit bigger and on slightly different paper, but you'll get the idea, so that I can just quickly show you how I've done these sections with the different colors. So the first thing I did was I decided that I wanted to try and create a lighter section here on each of them, and I wanted to create a shadow in here. So I've actually taken my main color. So let's do this, actually we'll do this with the pink. And I've just colored the entire section lightly, but I've left the white gap where I want to leave that. So I've kind of drawn it very, very lightly and then filled the rest in. Okay, then the next thing I wanted to do was actually start to build this shadow. So firstly, I went a little bit darker with the same color, just to kind of blend that and get the darker section working towards the light. So I'm pressing harder at this side and I'm going lighter as I get towards the middle. I've still got a lot of layers on this to do, so it will be a lot darker than this, as you can see. I also added a little bit of red through because that was the color that we'd created from our color palette. And then to create this shadow, rather than using black, because black, especially with a cheaper pencil, is going to be quite strong against the pink. So instead I thought about the color wheel like we've talked about in a previous video and tried to work out how to make a darker version of this same color. So I've actually used red in this case against the pink because I think that with the pink actually works quite well in creating that shadow. And I've actually added a little bit of, let me think, I think it was green that I added. Let's just try that. Very, very lightly. Just to get a little bit more towards a gray or a black, like a shadow, without actually using the black pencil. So once we're kind of happy with that shadow and that's kind of blending out okay, then I've just gone over the whole thing again with the pink and pressed a little bit harder to really get that pigment down and get the color stronger. So this bit's actually got a little bit of pink on top as well. It's not completely white, just because I feel like the completely white wouldn't be totally natural. But that is essentially what I've done, and I've copied that same process on these different parts here. The only difference with the purple is that purple's obviously a bit of a darker color. So in picking my blacks, I actually used a brown over the side. And I also went over with the black, but very lightly, just because I found that because it's already a dark color, that actually worked fine to help with the shadows. So let's just do the purple as well, just to show you. So again, I sort of picked out my light spot first and just very, very lightly did that so that I know what I'm doing. And I want it to line up with the pink because as you can see, that white line continues down. Another way you could do this is actually coloring it all the same color and then come back with an eraser and actually like take that pencil off down that line. It's probably a more accurate way to do it, but at the same time, because I don't know much about how these cheap pencils work with this paper, I didn't want to take the risk in not being able to get the color back off, so I've decided to just draw it in the first place. So one thing that has become super obvious to me as I am doing this second page is that the paper I thought I was using on the original drawing is not the paper I thought I was using. I've bought a Quill 200 GSM paper stock that I like to use for my pencil drawings, mainly because it was just what I found available that was a bit thicker than just a printer paper, but it works really well with the pencils being that little bit thicker, even though it's not sort of one of the best papers around. So when I've pulled out this piece of paper, and you might be able to see the difference if you're looking at them both, that the first page has a bit more of a yellow tone to it. It actually also has not much of a different texture, but enough of a different texture that it's having a huge effect on how my pencils work on it. And so I'm really liking this second page and how it feels a lot more, and it's a lot easier to blend the color and lay down the color than what the page that I've actually put all the effort into is. So, I mean, that's a bit disappointing for me because I've put all this effort into a piece of paper that's obviously not what I expected. But it does make a really good point for us that paper is so important, that if you're really wanting to get good results out of your pencils, it's worth investing in good paper. And I think this triggers me in thinking that I need to make a new video at some point in the future to actually compare some different papers and to actually find out which paper is the best, which ones are the best for pencils. And I know markers are a whole different game again. So if that's something that you would find interesting, let me know in the comments and I might make an upcoming video comparing some different papers for you. So back to the main page, I'm using a black pencil very lightly to shade the white sections of my balloon. I want to be really light with the black because I don't want heavy shadows, so I'm holding the pencil further back and using it on an angle. At this point, I haven't had much practice working with light sources, so look, I'm sure this isn't entirely accurate, but I'm just trying to logically work out which areas would be darker and lighter to give the balloon a slight 3D look. If I were being more accurate, I'd probably add a warm light over all the balloons because the sun would definitely be casting a lot of warm light and possibly some of these other colors during a sunset. But I'm not exactly going for realism here, and so I don't mind if it's not accurate to real life. After all, it's a coloring page. I'm really just going for a little bit of depth to make it more interesting. I did decide to try to lighten some areas further with an eraser, though I think I should probably use my Tombow eraser that I have somewhere rather than this one, so I'll grab that in a minute. I'm going to follow a similar process with the rest of the balloons, keeping my highlights towards the right and the shadows towards the left. Another huge tip that I haven't already mentioned is to always keep your pencils sharp. Sharp pencils are easier to work with. You have more control over the pressure and you can obviously get into tighter areas for small details. Especially with cheaper pencils, you want to have as much control as possible, so a sharp pencil is essential. With these balloons, I'm not going to do as many layers, partly because I'm still feeling a bit frustrated about my wrong paper and so I'm just not as patient anymore, but also because these smaller areas are easier to colour without the visible pencil marks. I've also been colouring this for at least an hour now, so I'm becoming more familiar with the Crayola pencils, which just shows that practice is so important. You might also notice that I'm not always using black for my shadows. Like I said before, I'm trying to use other colours to create more natural shadows as much as possible. And like we talked about in my previous video that I mentioned earlier, we can mix complementary colours to create blacks and greys, like red and green or blue and brown. I'm also using the orange to darken the yellow because that feels more natural than a straight black. And this time I found my Tombow eraser, which is working much better with the pencils. I'll pop a link in my blog post if you're interested in grabbing one. I was thinking about adding green to one of these balloons, but I really love this color palette and so I don't want to add to it with another color. So I've decided to create a rainbow using the current colors instead. Sorry, green. Interestingly enough, even though not all 12 of my colors are visible in this piece, I have actually used all 12 pencils because my greens have helped me with some of the shadows. I even used the white, although it didn't really do anything. So I'd say I have successfully pulled off this cheap 12 pencil challenge, even if my paper has totally let me down, and look, I'm still kind of feeling frustrated about that. as I finish up, I have to say that these Crayolas are doing pretty well. I really don't think they compare to the artist grade pencils, and they shouldn't, because they are so much cheaper. But they are a very good pencil for the price. I've tried other cheap pencils in the past and they were a total waste of money. At least the Crayolas are still nice to use and have great colors. So if you want to go cheap, don't go for the no-name brands, stick with a brand like Crayola or some of the other more affordable student grade pencils. In fact, I'll be trying some of the other top recommended affordable pencils in the coming months. So if you'd like to see how they compare and find the best pencils for your budget, click the subscribe button below and turn on notifications so you'll see what I post in my future videos. If there is a particular brand that you'd like me to try, please tell me in the comments, because I'm on the hunt for the best, the most expensive, but also the most affordable and the best beginner sets, because there are a lot of pencil brands out there and a lot of questions that people have, and I want to take the guesswork out of it for you so that you can confidently buy a really good set of pencils for your coloring pages without breaking your budget. And if you're wanting to check out the tips that I've mentioned throughout this video to get the most out of your pencils, I've included a blog post with this page and all of my suggestions so that you can quickly refer back to them. You can check it out at the link in the description or by clicking the I at the top of your screen now. And I'm finally done. That took longer than expected and probably twice as long as it would have taken with better quality pencils, but I'm really happy with how it turned out. Despite all my layering, unfortunately you can still see the pencil lines on my background, and I think that's less about the pencils and more about my silly paper mix-up, which I'm really annoyed about. But look, it highlights that choosing the right paper is so important, and I will link to some better paper choices with my blog post. So as you can see, it is not impossible to create art with a cheap set of pencils. But I'll tell you what, the experience for me was just not the same as using my Prismacolors. So I do recommend, if you can, even if you can't invest in a massive 150 set, I know some of these expensive pencils like Holbeins or Caran d'Ache, they're like $300, $400, even $500. So that's just a bit unrealistic for most of us. But a small set of Prismacolor pencils or some of the other pencils that I'm going to be showing you in a future video are a great way to just take your adult coloring to the next level. It doesn't take much to be able to create beautiful blends and beautiful gradients and beautiful effects when you have a nice set of pencils. And in my opinion, the Crayolas, they're a good beginner pencil, but they just don't quite cut it compared to some of these others. So if you found this video interesting or helpful, please remember to like it below. Please subscribe and turn on notifications, because I have a video coming up. In fact, I have multiple videos coming up checking out some of the other pencil brands. I am going to be checking out some of the very expensive options like Caran d'Ache Luminance and the Holbeins, which have an amazing range of pastels, but I'm also going to be looking at some more affordable options. So there will be maybe 20 different pencil brands that I'm going to be comparing in a future video, and you don't want to miss it. So make sure you subscribe. And in the meantime, here is another video that you can check out.